Midwest Minority Think Tank presents live the value of your vote, post-election analysis with your host Mark Carvin-Oles and co-host Leslie Wilson with correspondent Ernestine Wilson. Wednesday, November 18, 2020 on YouTube/Mark Oles, 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. You do not wish to miss the value of your vote, post-election analysis. Welcome to the Midwest Minority Think Tank presents live the value of your vote post-election analysis. Well, as you well know, it is over. The election has been decided and we're moving into a new phase. And we tonight want to look at what do we consider as our post-election priorities and the post-election analysis, not so much as it pertains to what has transpired, because we all have those numbers in the greatest turnout in the history of America in terms of a presidential election, even for the winner as well as the loser. But there are some key issues in our community, and I refer to the Black community, in terms of the post-election analysis. How does that impact the community? What are we looking forward to, and what did we get in terms of momentum from this great election of 2020, which has been billed, as so many others have in the past, the greatest election of our time. And each time that we have an election is going to impact us for generations, and this one is no exception. And so we need to focus in on what is going to be the outcome in terms of how do we position ourselves in terms of getting the most positive influence going forward in the nation, not just for one segment of the nation, but in terms of how do we move society as a result of this election. Not so much depending upon where we are at the moment, but the post-election analysis is geared to helping us shape where we shall go in the future. And I'm going to have our guest today, co-host Leslie Wilson, and also our guest correspondent Ernestine Melton, and they have some great ideas, great concepts, and great analysis. They've been preparing for this, and they're ready. And I encourage you to get out your pad and your paper. You can send us a comment at any point during the broadcast tonight, and we will bring that to the panel so that we can respond to whatever your comments are for the evening. I'm going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with our co-host, Leslie Wilson. Welcome back to the value of your vote, post-election analysis. And we now are joined with Leslie Wilson, our co-host. Leslie, how are you this evening?
I'm great, Mark. How are you?
It's a fantastic time to be alive, and I am excited about where we are in terms of optimism. This is the most optimistic point in my life, and I make that statement about my optimism as it relates to the fact that there's so many uncertainties, and so this is the time for people to be positive and have optimism, because when everything is uncertain, that means that there are great opportunities opening up, and great pathways that people are waiting to respond to. So without any further ado, I think that's the traditional statement. Where we start, Leslie, with this post-election analysis, what do you see?
Well, first of all, I do want to say that I share your optimism. I was just in a conversation earlier today, and that was one of the things, one of my takeaways, on November 4th, was that I felt hopeful again, even though there were still some uncertainties and there were no final numbers, I still felt hopeful. And so I'm like you, I'm feeling very, very optimistic. I have a couple of thoughts though, just about post-election analysis viewpoints. One of them is what happens when we vote, and just really looking at the number of minority voters, people of color, and particularly African American voters who turned out in high numbers, similar to 2008 when we elected our first Black president. So I was really moved by that because I talked to a lot of people who were sort of on the fence, and somehow in that process I saw that change and was just very, very proud of the response from our community with regard to this election, because I think what he said to me is that we understand what's at stake if we don't vote and if we don't create an opportunity and give our best efforts to make certain that there will be some change. So that was one of my big takeaways in this.
Well, the numerical figures are you can't dispute those in terms of the turnout. Now comes the optimism, because that turnout is not going to decrease going forward in terms of presidential election. The momentum that has to be gathered is in 2021 when the local elections are up. And if you can keep that momentum going to the midterm election of 2022, I think that the great turnout is also going to serve notice to both political parties, because
Absolutely.
the crossover vote from established groups were sending a signal that you can no longer take the younger people who came out in great numbers. You can no longer take them for granted that they're just going to vote and vote your way, and they are more tuned in or locked in that what are you going to do for us in terms of getting this vote,
Right.
and you just can't take it for granted anymore.
Absolutely. So it puts us in a position to be a part of the solution and bring to the discussion or to the table some of the concerns that have been sort of put aside, but at the same time in greater volumes. And as we organize around those things, and I know we're going to talk about strategies later, but that's also very important.
Yeah, and another thing that came out that I paid close attention to, we tend to assume that the Black vote is going to be Democratic, but the Democrats also assumed that the Hispanic vote was going to be Democratic, and they also assumed that the Asian vote was going to be Democratic, and they discovered that it was voiced that from the Hispanic community, especially, that they wanted to be treated the same as you treat the white community in terms of addressing their issues, looking at a cross section of voters, and that we are not going to be labeled as the Black community as a monolithic voting bloc. And so to say that resonated within the Asian community, the Hispanic community, and that served notice that whoever's in power are going to have to begin to deal with the diversity within a bloc and stop labeling people simply by their race, that and assuming that you can control the thinking of all the people based on just their race or their nationality. And we began to see a lot of that movement in the Black community this time, especially among the Black male, that they were beginning to say that one party does not control everyone, and now it's about what are you producing, and if you're not producing, we're gonna find that the vote is going to begin to move and shift quite frequently.
And
Uh,
that's fair game. That's absolutely fair game. One of the reports that I read really talked about that yes, the African American vote remained in the Democratic Party, particularly African American females. However, in the Hispanic vote, it really was very mixed with regards to, it was more regional in terms of
yeah,
what happened in Florida regarding Cuban Americans versus what happened in America, in Arizona regarding Mexicans. And the same way with the Asian vote as well. So I do think, and like you, had dialogue with folks leading up to the election who were not voting Democratic. They were not. The other interesting thing that I read, and I believe it to be true, is that the vote really went that way primarily because we wanted change. We wanted the person that was in out of that seat. And so that may not be the case with the next election. And so it gives us an opportunity to bring up different issues and say, if you want my vote, then earn my vote. Here, let our voices be heard. And so the value of our vote is really in being able to negotiate for our vote.
And some key issues began to surface in terms of how we refer to diversity in this country, because the race issue seems to be one that catches a headline for a week and then quickly is covered up in the narrative. And the term people of color. And we're finding now that people the media wants to use that term people of color, but people aren't buying into that. I'm Black, I'm Hispanic, I'm Latino, I'm Asian. And so you cannot keep putting everybody in these neat little tidy categories and think that they're going to function based on how you label them. So when you begin to talk about people of color and people aren't responding to that, they say, no, we're talking about our issues. And so that's one way that the alarm has been sounded, that you're not going to be able to assimilate everyone into this minority vote versus majority vote. No, it's going to be, you're going to have to begin to deal with people and where they are and what their issues are.
Absolutely.
And I think that's going to be a key factor going forward. And that's why
it certainly will be for me. I mean, there was a great learning curve in watching this process in so many different ways, and really understanding that we wait, and oftentimes many communities wait until close to the election and get really, really involved. But there is a process from here to the next election, whether that's our general election or a national election, whatever. There's a process and there are strategies that must be put in place so that we can make an informed decision about who it is that we're going to vote for, and based on what criteria.
Absolutely. Well, we can take another quick break, and Leslie, and we're going to be joined by our guest correspondent, Ernestine Middleton, on the other side of this quick break.
Right.
How do I write my life story? I know hurt and pain. I don't like either one, whether physical or emotional. Herein contains my story, Not Without Scars, Part 2. Optimism, perseverance, persistence, resilience. 2 decades of personal struggle. Optimism. I faced the new millennium with hopefulness. Perseverance. My ego, my humble beginnings, my desire to achieve never allow me to turn away from a difficult task. Persistence. Opposition should be anticipated as an effective strategy to victory surfaces. Resilience. Difficulties do not automatically spell termination. Scars reveal my imperfection as reminders of past episodes of pain, sorrow, or triumph. Scars can tell beautiful story endings or relay misery that wishes to remain anonymous. This work is meant to help others who have experienced decades of struggle. When struggles appear to never end, you must get through the night and face the challenge of a new dawn with fresh hope.
Welcome back. We are here with Leslie Wilson, my co-host, and Ernestine Middleton, our correspondent, and we are dealing with the subject of the post-election analysis. And we're thankful to have Ernestine with us. And what do you see, Ernestine, in terms of the post-election analysis?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on here. I was really enjoying the conversation between you and Leslie, and you hit upon some really good points. One of the things that stands out to me post-election, and it really goes prior to the election, is the division that has occurred in this country. I think it was always there, but it's more to me pronounced. It's more than just I want to be identified as Asian or African American or Latino. It's also liberal versus conservative, and the labels and the things that go along with that, where they are demonizing each other on different things. Diversity is what has made this country great, and division is what is beginning to tear down the very foundation of democracy, as I can see it. I think that I'm so glad that the election turned out the way it did, but I think that the underlying cause for so many people being on one side or the other is not going to go away. And this whole issue about the legitimacy of the election and whether there was some fraud committed, that's a message that has been put out there. And I listened to Congressman Jim Clyburn. I'm not going to try to quote him because that would not be fair. But one of the things that they did talk about was messaging. And the Democratic Party has allowed the message of Black Lives Matter to be subjugated and to be taken over, to look at it as not the Black Lives Matter that is helping all Black people and all people rise above, as now it's a Marxist organization, because one of the founders is a Marxist. I think I'm saying that right, Marcus.
Yes.
Yeah. So those kind of things concern me as I think about the election and the results of the election. Not things that we're just changing who's sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but there are some systemic problems that we have in this country. Some of them brand new, like COVID, that they're not going away right away. There's a lot of talk about the vaccine coming out, but what COVID did was bring up the fact that there's a real disparity between the healthcare one group receives and the healthcare another group receives. And so then you have a disproportionate amount of people, I was going to say people of color, but Black folks and brown folks that are dying, and other people seem to be recovering from it. And you wonder why. It's because of the underlying conditions. So I have a lot of concerns. The other thing that really concerns me post-election is that the fact that our children are now having to learn remotely. That is very tough. That's tough on the family unit. That's tough education-wise. There's so many models of how we each learn. But basically, when you take a child and sit them in front of a computer and you're trying to get them to grasp a concept, and they're already disadvantaged in so many ways, it makes you wonder how far are we going to fall behind if this goes on much longer. And so I've thrown out a lot of things against the wall.
Yes,
so.
You did. Quite a few. Let's try to bring some of those in.
Okay, all right.
Let's start with what has been said by the incoming administration that would give us hope that what you have just described is going to be a part of that first 100-day agenda. And I won't go into that because I don't want to unfairly delve into something that may change before we even get to that first 100 days. But when you talk about the isolation of learning, the people that have the least amount of resources always suffer in terms of isolation. Not only will they suffer the most in terms of isolation in youth learning, but also the social interaction when you create a hermit type atmosphere, and that's what we're dealing with in terms of now not allowing people to interact with one another. And I don't mean it that they've been prohibited from interacting, but simply because of the precautions of the health concern, you now have massive amount of people who are being isolated and are not being able to interact by neighbors, family, and so that whole social structure is now being affected by this. And I made reference to this in a study I did back in April about what COVID was doing and how people daily routine caused them the most trouble. When we now analyze the data, is when a person's daily routine is interrupted, it causes so much havoc in their social structure as well as their economic structure. And this is what we're seeing now in terms of learning, parenting, and neighborhood interaction. And so we're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination when it comes to the COVID situation. But it's not just a matter of the post election analysis about projects and programs. It has become an ideology of wear the mask or don't wear the mask as a means of identification. So the post-election analysis, when we look at something that's about a health concern, it has become a polarization statement.
Sure. And so when you
really has.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ernestine.
No. I was only going to say is that they've taken the mask and they've politicized it. You know, if you're wearing a mask, then you're given into fear. You must be a Democrat, you know, or liberal or something of that nature. And all of it is really deadly to our health, and the fact that we are not having a smooth transition where that our president-elect can get the information that he needs from doctors like Dr. Fauci and others that will help make a smooth transition, help get us to the point where we can get this virus kind of behind us and get a handle on it. And these things are being done intentionally. Then on the other part of that is there is suspicion among Black folks about taking a vaccine. That, you know, I mean, even my own house, I won't call anybody out.
We have a great history.
We have a great history
with experimental drugs and vaccines, whether in North Carolina and sterilization of women and the Tuskegee group. The skepticism is there not just because of the current administration. It's the long history of how we have been victimized throughout this nation. The current administration did not invent racism. They might have put an exclamation point behind what is already there, but what we're dealing with is not going to go away. And I think the incoming administration will do itself a disservice if it continues along the path of the blame game as it relates to COVID, because neither party can heal. And so there's some steps that can be. And so if you run with one issue that's an impossible win issue, then you serve to do yourself damage going forward, because people are now waiting to see what is it that you're going to do. If you said the previous administration couldn't do anything or didn't do anything, so now you're asked to you're positioning yourself to produce something that you may not can produce. So you have to be careful how you shape your narrative, and that's what I'm taking away from it. Leslie, you are a healthcare consultant. You tell us how we get out of this.
I wish I had that magic wand and that kind of wisdom. I also a couple of things, though, as Ernestine brought the issue up with regard to education, and then again the impact on households, and we're certainly seeing that and hearing that with regard to the in many households, the ability of those families to meet the needs of those children, not just educationally, but socially and emotionally. And so, you know, I was
Right.
going to say that I'm wondering what is in the plan and how, you know, what is our responsibility to begin to craft a message, or what is the current, the president-elect and his team, what is their responsibility to begin to help craft some messaging? Because certainly it has not stopped the current administration at any point in time. He was always out ahead of some things, right or wrong. And in most cases, it was not a positive.
Wow.
So I really feel that these issues were pre-election, and there's certainly post-election, and there had to have been, I would hope there's been some forethought into what next and how do they begin to develop, even if it's an undercurrent, if it's an underground, it doesn't matter. I don't know that we can wait till January 20th, you know, for all of this. So that's one of the things. The other thought that I have is that we have to pay attention and be vigilant with regard to our, not just in our home, but in our communities. Those communities can expand to extended families, within our church communities, within our social circles, and begin to talk about, you know, the realities of what's going on and what are some of the best practices, what are some of the things that we know that we can share in the meantime, in between time, so to speak. And so I think there's a great responsibility with the incoming delegation to really begin to craft some messaging and begin to actually begin to share that on some level. No, it's not coming from an official office, but these are the same people that were talking before as elected officials. So there, I think there's a way to do that. You have to work with and through people. And this is a situation, unfortunately, that we find ourselves in, which is another part of my thinking about the analysis. It's like we're at the stalemate in a lot of on a lot of levels. You know, what is our responsibilities? What can we do? I looked at the response to from the citizens in Michigan when two of the persons on the election board would not certify those votes. And the citizens were outraged, and they were all, because the call was on Zoom, and they were very, very vocal about their disappointment because it was becoming along party lines. And we have to remember that this is about people. It's really not about parties. And when we lose
Absolutely.
that, then it's when we begin to become selfish and self-absorbed and want to maintain this power base. But it's so much bigger than that.
That's the key, Leslie. The retention of power has gotten to the point that it's win or lose along party lines and not win or lose along helping the people. The people have just become the tools to get people into their power base, and the outcomes in terms of the people. We've had this gridlock, and I blame both houses of Congress, both parties, that there was not more done for the people in terms and hadn't done for the people as it relates to a stimulus package. I mean, I don't mean for one moment that we should depend on the government to take care of us at all times. But when you have the capital of Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, had the city of Columbus converted one of its largest arenas into an eviction court to handle the number of cases of people who were going to be evicted. And in order to keep it with social distancing, they had to use the arena, downtown arena where the hockey team played, as an eviction court because so many people could not pay their rent, could not pay their mortgage, and so when you have that kind of impact, and all that you're concerned about is, did my party win? And I'm afraid that the euphoria of 145 million people that went to the polls is going to disintegrate into a chaotic situation when when you're telling people about clean energy, and I recycle and all that. When you start talking about clean energy and global warming and climate change, and I'm facing eviction in Columbus, Ohio, and it's cold, I don't want to hear that. And so it's
Right.
now going to be who's ever in control, because there are Republican governors, Democratic governors, people along every line that have gained some semblance of power. In order for them to retain it in these upcoming elections, they are going to have to produce, and they're going to have to produce for the people, and not just more political rhetoric.
Absolutely, absolutely. The I'm one of my observations that it will be more of the same is concerning on many levels. And it's what we talked about in the previous discussion is how do we take a role, an active role in ensuring that that doesn't happen? That is not business as usual. You know, a lot of the candidates were defeated as a result of talking about them being career politicians, a part of the Washington establishment, and those sorts of things. And if that's going to be more of the same, then, you know, shame on us, because I think that we have to begin to expect more of those elected officials on every level. And it can start right in your backyard, so that that information is taken up to Washington, that, you know, we cannot stand for more of the same. It's, you know, we didn't do what we just did to have more of the same. We did it so that we would have a change. And it's my hope that, you know, part of what will come out of that is our active involvement in this electoral process on a daily basis, keeping up with what's going on and being a part of the solution for the change that we want to see.
Well, absolutely, and I think that,
and I agree with that totally.
I think also that one of the
Go
keys
ahead.
that we can't afford to overlook is that in spite of the change at the top of the ticket, the conservative movement made progress in the House. So that should serve as notice that people want change, but not just change in personalities. They want change in terms of services being delivered in return for their vote. Listen, hold on, people. We're going to come back after a brief message, and we're going to come back with Ernestine, because I think I stepped on her thought that she had ready to espouse.
We're pleased to take questions and comments.
The Great Lockdown of 2020, a mid-crisis analytical report, represents a historical work. The people provide indicators to their needs and roles in building and establishing the new norm. The voice of the people places at the fingertips of decision makers knowledge of how the area's resources should be deployed to best serve the society and address the needs and concerns of the people going forward. This study serves as a guide to where key research should be directed and sets the course to engage resources during crises by future social theoreticians. Comparison of responses on multiple levels provide an uncanny insight. The capture of a population's response in the midst of a crisis compared to a post-crisis reflection shall prove to be of monumental value into human reactions facing uncertainty during and post a calamity.
Welcome back to The Value of Your Vote, the post-election analysis. And just as I promised, Ernestine, you have the floor.
Okay. Well, I'm having a senior moment. I don't know exactly what I was going to say, but when we talk about putting people over politics, most of the time people are seen as just like pawns in a chess game. They're expendable. What happens through the campaign is they push out a lot of the red meat issues that they know are going to get people all riled up. They don't deal with the real local issues that, like Leslie's talking about. all politics are local. They don't deal with those. They throw out, some things that's going to get everybody involved. Was the defund the police, and nobody wants to defund the police. But that's what was being played. The fact that you're not going to be safe in neighborhoods. That's what was being played in the suburbs, and that stuff had an impact. And as a result, instead of really having a real hold on the House of Representatives, we lost 10 seats. And they haven't finished counting, so we may lose even more. That kind of stuff is disturbing to me on the political level, because what I think it comes down to is that we need to educate the voters. We don't hear about voting until it's time for an election. And then these commercials, everybody's posting on social media, you need to vote. But you need to be involved before it's time to vote. And I know, Mark, that you have some strategies and things that's going to help address that. That to me is very fundamental, especially some of our young people that don't spend a lot of time doing anything other than what young people do. And I was young too. So, they like to party and they like to get out and socialize, and some of these big issues, not all of them, but some of these issues are just not important right now. But we've got to start educating people on how this issue is going to impact your life years down the road, how it impacts it right now, how it's going to impact your children, how we're losing now some important ground that we really had to work hard and struggle and sweat to gain, how that could be taken away with just an executive order. So that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about, the people's issues not being important. People don't think about, politicians don't really think about their constituents until it's time to get the vote. That's when you see them in the churches. That's when you see them on television. That's when you see them at the town halls. So. And
that's the key. If we continue to allow them to operate on that, they have a manual. And so if the people do not say you have to turn to another manual, they will continue to do that. And the greatest campaign that goes on within the campaign is get out the vote campaign, not change the issue. Let's get out the vote, and they make people feel guilty. I've heard a lot of brothers, they make you feel guilty if you don't do it, but you're not getting anything. So did you vote? Well, what am I voting for? Nobody said, stop me and said that this is the issue. So I remember there was an issue in Ohio for marijuana use. And they had a lot of young people out soliciting, signing people up to get it on the ballot because they wanted to smoke marijuana. But underlying on that was how many companies could actually sell the marijuana in Ohio. And what they were doing was voting themselves out of a $1 billion industry because they can never own a licenseship or dealership. And so when it's the get out the vote campaign now, it needs to be looked at. We need to turn away from the narrative and turn the page on the narrative and control the narrative, because whoever controls the narrative has the power. And if the narrative does not change, the power does not change. And so that's one of the key factors that I believe we cannot wait to 2024 to start talking about voting again. There has to be some, and I know that there's always the letdown. We just drove the people to vote in record numbers, and now we haven't even gotten into the inauguration, and you want to start talking about get out the vote again? Well, absolutely, but this time we're talking about get out the education about the vote, and I call that the forward plan strategy, not looking back, not reactionary, but a forward plan strategy. And if we don't have that, If we don't start that talk now, okay, you may not have a big rally this week, but if you start the conversation now, because 2021 is only a few weeks away.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
I know.
so what we're going to do, wait to the primaries and wait till November and say, get out to vote again. And that's why there's such a fall off between the midterm turnout and the presidential turnout, because the get out the vote monies only come from the two parties who are trying to retain control. And so when we begin to view this in terms of the people having control, and let me borrow something that the current president has done that allows me to know that people can do it. He controlled the cable networks by tweeting at night.
Yeah.
It might have been what we would call wacko, off the cuff, way out there, makes no sense, a lie, but they talked about it for 24 hours. So he controlled the narrative with a tweet. Now, we have that same capability, that same technology, and instead of having a flash mob scene with the social media platform, this is a great tool that can be used to advance the causes. And another issue that we saw that in 2016, when he was the current president was running for, he used the media instead of money. And here we have lobbyists every day in Washington, D.C., giving $10,000 to a senator every day. A senator has to raise $10,000 a day to stay as a senator. And that's a documented fact. And there are networks that track all of their website that track all the funding that goes into your political campaign. So that's that we can track. And so if lobbyists are, what makes the National Rifle Association so powerful? Because they have given Republicans and Democrats money, and the Second Amendment stays where it is. Now, the criminal justice reform currently needs to be reformed, because a man or a woman who has a felony cannot have a weapon in their home. So they can't protect their family. But yet you say it's a constitutional right. And so what you have now is the latest Supreme Court appointee who says that unless that person has been deemed a threat, it's a violation of that person's constitutional right. So what I'm saying is there's going to be an escalation of weaponry.
That's already here.
Guaranteed by the Constitution. So if we do not begin to educate on all these issues as it relates to what is law, and I had to say this to some people, don't worry about the inauguration. The law is going to happen. So don't allow the tweets to take your focus off what is really important. And so right now, we can't demand anything from the current incoming administration. The time to make those demands was when we were getting out the vote. You can't negotiate now. You got to wait and see. And that's the problem with getting caught up in the euphoria of a campaign without making demands before the person comes into power. Because it's easy to say now, well, I would do that, but it was in such bad situation. It's going to take 3 or 4 years to get us out of here. And so you need to elect me again next term, then I can do something. I've been hearing that rhetoric for years, and we got to stop that.
Yeah.
And as our generation, we cannot allow the next generation to come in and follow that same pattern. And that's why some of the more radical young people are rejecting the wisdom that our generation could give to them, because they see as if we did not do anything with it. And so now they don't want to have anything to do with us. And so we have to have a forward plan strategy. And that starts today.
And Mark, in talking about the young people, I want to stay there for a minute, because they are our future. I mean, I know it's well-known fact, and I don't want to just sound like I'm singing the song, but that's something where we have to invest in that, though. We have to sit at the table and hear all sides of the story. Have a large family of youngsters and varying opinions about many things. But when we don't listen, when we fail to listen to them, we're missing an opportunity to educate and be educated. Because we're not necessarily privy to what their conversations are, just as they aren't to ours. And so, to have that credibility, I think, with our young people, it's going to take listening to their voices with regard to what they see, because they're right in a lot of ways. We have let down our guard somewhat without bringing them to the table to understand not just the importance of voting, but the value of their vote and what they and how to hold people accountable to get their vote and what happens after they get their vote.
It's often overlooked that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was 26 years old when he became a world figure.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Right.
He was 20. He was
Right.
26.
That's true.
And
26.
It's not that we don't want to hear what young people say. We need to give them the platform when they're saying something. And he was wise enough to come to the forefront in his early 20s, but he still stayed connected to Dr. Benjamin Mays over at Morehouse and others he was able to take the sage wisdom from them and put it into his message. I remember a documentary where Pop Staples, of the Staples Singers, he said, if this man can preach that message, I can sing it. Mm-hmm. And that's when he changed it. And he caught a lot of flack because people said, well, he stopped singing about Jesus. But no, he started singing about a movement that was about justice.
Right.
And so when you have a 26-year-old that's saying Black Lives Matter and another 26-year-old that wants to go the traditional route, you don't pit one against the other.
Absolutely.
You hear what they're saying and encourage them to hear what we're saying. I try to write as much as possible the thoughts that I have and reflections I have as it relates to our society. And my reasoning is that some of those 25-year-olds and 24-year-olds will pick that writing up at some point and do with it what I did not have the opportunity to. But we have to remember that Martin Luther King Jr. was 26, and those people around him, some of them were younger than him. Mm-hmm. And that's where we got the John Lewis's and the other the Stokely Carmichaels and the Rap Browns and the others that emerged on the scene. It was paramount to see some young men standing on the state capitol in Sacramento with rifles. I'm talking about the Black Panthers, but they were doing what was written in the law. And we get distracted. We get distracted because we do not know what is there. And so in this time, we need to go back to Civics 101, I call it. And that's making people aware of what is actually already in law. And grassroots organizing is not to be overlooked in terms of just getting a bunch of people together and calling it grassroots organizing. Grassroots organizing is organizing around an issue, organizing around a cause, and being committed to that for the long term. When the Montgomery bus boycott started, it wasn't planned for a day. It went on for over a year, and people had made a commitment. So you can't ask people to come to a great march just to have numbers. They have to know what it is that they're making the sacrifice for. Why are you asking me to make this kind of sacrifice? And that's what I mean by youth engagement. Not just having young people around you and say, look at the young people who came out to march. No, the youth engagement is like Leslie referred to it, You got to hear what they have to say, and in the course of listening to them, give them sage wisdom so that they will listen to you. And that's how we move through the teaching, learning, and the increase of the knowledge base.
Do you think that in the Democratic Party, you're getting a division between the progressives like AOC? I can never remember what her name is because they started labeling her AOC, and some of the older. I mean, there seems to be some pushback on that.
Oh, absolutely. There's pushback because, as Leslie pointed out earlier, they don't want to give up their power. And radical, there's power has never given up power, release power because you asked for it. Power has to be taken away, and it's only given by more power. And so when you have voices like the new voices that are coming forth, and it's amazing because they're saying something that the hundreds of people already in place did say, and you had 4 people that were elected in the 2018 Congress that began to bring this to the forefront. So if that number increases to 8, how did 4 to 8 people have the ability to commandeer a party? It goes back to now the technology that's available now, and that we can get people to understand that when you have a discussion, that you now have the tools to do it. Ice Cube made it clear that he was interested in helping Black people, and it exposed that rhetoric of the people of color. The Italian community is not interested in Mark O's opinion about the issues that go on in the Italian community. The Catholic Church is not interested in what I have to say. They have a pope.
And Georgia's not interested in what Lindsey Graham has to say.
It shouldn't be, but they're cousins. So. that's you have a family issue there, Leslie. but our primary focus has to be, and we have to come back next month or our next time and talk about our planned strategy. But one thing I would like to say is that we need to get to the point where the presentation of issues is to candidates for them, not the candidates coming and presenting their issues to the people. And again, when you have these townhouses, the townhouse meeting, and the candidate comes and espouses what they're thinking. No, we want you to come and sit down. This is that listening process that we were talking about. The candidate needs to come and sit and listen to what the people have to say. And this is the big one that they're not ready for. We need to have a ballot prepared for the candidate.
Absolutely.
These are our issues. Now you check the issues that you support, and then we tally up. If there are 10 candidates, give each one of them a ballot and say, these are our issues. Now you check which one of these issues you can support if you are elected. And once we get there, once the people get that back, then we can determine that this person said they would support 7, this one only supported 3. So this is our candidate because this person is already committed to support more of our issues. And that's how we get the accountability. And Ernestine and I had a conversation once off camera about accountability. And I call it ineffective lawmakers. You talk about people of color, you talk about Black people, and then when we look at your record, you voted with the opposition. But you come back and say, well, I couldn't do anything because they were against me. And then we check your record and you were with them because there's no votes that are not recorded. And one thing about America, and everything is documented. So if we would take the time and do some research and read, you will see that the one that you thought was with you is not with you.
That's a good point, Mark. That's a very good point. And being able to voting records of the elected officials that we have, And it is something, but it goes back to educating ourselves on the process, educating ourselves on the roles and responsibilities of each elected official. As you said earlier, they all have a job description, and we need to evaluate them in terms of whether they're doing their job based on that job description, and is it in our best interest? And so if we know the voting record, when we can go with saying, this is how you voted last time. And see, the other thing I learned from this is something you said earlier, is that folks expect us not to be educated, but to come and listen without, bringing valuable input in the discussion, because we don't know. We don't know the issues. We don't know how they voted. And so you could be talking to the enemy and think that you got a friend right in there because you don't know how they voted the last time. So that's a very good point.
Ernestine, we're going to do our 2-minute drill so we can close out, and you get the honor of being on camera up front by yourself for 2 minutes.
Okay, well, when we first started out, I threw a lot of my concerns, and I think that out of everything we talked about, the impact of COVID, the impact of on our children, on our health, I think the most important thing to talk about and to follow up on is educating the voter before election day. I think that is vitally important, that we really get to the issues that are important to us and to be able to present those to candidates, not to someone who's already won the election and say, well, you said you were going to do such and such. No, show me what you do, tell me what you're going to do. I'm going to hold you accountable for that. I think that accountability is what we really absolutely need to get back to, that these people are elected to represent people, not to get in the office and to just line their pockets and work for large corporations and let the lobbyists make sure that they get elected over and over again, which is a whole nother conversation, because I'm a big believer in term limits. But I like to kind of end with that, and also end with the importance of the fact that we do have a runoff election coming up in Georgia, and those people need to be supported. There's a lot online, controls the Senate, as everyone knows. So that's where I'd like to end with it, Mark. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, Leslie, I won't hold you up. I'll give you your 2 minutes as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I guess one of the things I'm thinking about immediately is, what can each individual person do to become a part of the solution in their communities with regard to elected officials and being a part of the democratic, i.e., and political process in this country? There are many organizations who are, very, very tied to the political process, and we don't know who they are. And so I think I would say, let's do some homework, find out who they are, and get involved on an individual level. Bring your voice to the table to be heard, because no vote, no voice. And if you're not informed, you still don't have an educated voice. And so when in these settings, you have an opportunity to be heard because you've done your homework. That's one of the things. And the other part of it is to really begin to think about how important it is for us to be present and support our young. They are doing as well. And thirdly, to support our candidates in Georgia. Send money out of state. It's okay. We heard in the election in South Carolina, the super PAC money that was coming into the state, really for both candidates. So just because you don't live in a state, if you believe that's important for that state, that person in that state to win, send your money. Put your money where your mouth is. You can donate at any level. They'll all tell you, send us $1 and they'll be happy, because 1 million people sending $1 is $1 million. So those are the things that I would say. Be a part of the solution, participate, support financially, and be in the room when the decisions are being made.
All right. Well, there you have it. Part 1 of the post-election analysis. We definitely did not cover everything, but we did bring it to your attention that the post-election analysis is not time to quit. it's the time to start and move forward to the next election and the next round. Thank you for allowing us in for this hour on the value of your vote post-election analysis. The Midwest Minority Think Tank presents live the value of your vote post-election analysis with your host Mark Carvin-Oles and co-host Leslie Wilson with correspondent Ernestine Wilson. Wednesday, November 18, 2020 on YouTube/Mark Oles, 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. You do not wish to miss the value of your vote post-election analysis.